Okay, today we're going to start looking at Maya Angelou and her view of education. This may seem rather unusual because she's not traditionally seen as an educational theorist and she doesn't quite fit the a view that we have of educational theorists. This is your traditional view of what a educational theorist will look like. They perhaps work in a university. They could be all manner, well, they could be male or female, but the ones that we've looked at tend to be Western, perhaps Eastern, a little bit white men. And Maya Angelou does not fit that. She never, well, she received numerous university degrees, but not because of studies that she had done, but because of the life that she had lived. And we're going to explore her life in far more detail. The first thing that we're going to do is we're just going to take a small snapshot of Maya Angelou's life. There's various different aspects of her life that we're going to explore. The first thing that we'll do though is we'll watch a short video about her life and then discuss some of the various things that actually took place throughout it.
She is impossible to define. An author, a poet, a civil rights activist, an actress, a dancer. Marguerite Johnson was born in St. Louis, Missouri in 1928. When her parents divorced, she was sent with her brother to live with her grandmother in racially segregated Stamps, Arkansas.
Black people depended upon other black people for sustenance, all sorts of sustenance, social, economic, religious sustenance.
As a child, she formed a strong bond with her brother, who gave her the nickname Maya. She was taught by her grandmother to celebrate life to the fullest. She would need to keep her grandmother's positive messages handy when at age 7 she was molested by her mother's boyfriend. She only told her brother, but a few days later, the attacker turned up dead. Believing her words had killed the man,
I stopped speaking for 5.5 years. I simply refused to speak. I had voice, but I refused.
When she spoke again, she and her brother joined her mother in San Francisco. She won a scholarship to study dance and drama. While she was in San Francisco, her progressive political views began to form. At the age of 16, after quitting high school briefly to become San Francisco's first African-American cable car operator, she returned to her studies. During her senior year, she became pregnant. She gave birth to her son, Guy, and supported him working as a waitress and a cook. In 1952, she married Greek sailor Tosh Angelou and traded in her waitress uniform for a microphone. She became a singer, taking the name Maya Angelou. The marriage didn't last, but her career flourished, landing a role in the stage production of Porgy and Bess and recording the album Calypso Lady in 1957. Although she had always penned lyrics and poetry, she finally began pursuing her writing more seriously. She moved to Harlem and joined the Harlem Writers Guild.
She learned how to overcome the limitations and the challenges of her youth to achieve stardom as an artist and a writer.
Her unique journey continued when she moved to Cairo, Egypt, with her then love interest, South African civil rights activist Vusumuzi Maki. She served as the editor of the English-language weekly, The Arab Observer, before moving to Ghana to work as editor for the Ghanaian Times. In 1964, Angelou returned to America to help her friend Malcolm X build his organization of African American Unity. Those plans were scrapped when Malcolm X was assassinated in 1965. The assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968 left her devastated. But along with the great joys and painful lows she had experienced, her rich life served as the inspiration for her memoir, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Published in 1970, covering the early years of her life, it was a critical and commercial triumph. In the following years, more books followed, including 4 more volumes of her autobiography.
By the 1980s and 90s, America as a whole, regardless of race, had a profound appreciation of her talents as an artist, as a poet, and writer, And so now she is widely seen as a national treasure.
In 1993, she was asked by incoming President Bill Clinton to compose a poem which she would recite at the inauguration. Since 1981, she has served as a Reynolds Professor of American Studies at Wake Forest. And she has still found time to act in films and even host a radio show on Oprah Winfrey's XM radio network.
As you can see, Maya Angelou had a very varied life, and actually that video itself is quite a sanitized version of the events that happened throughout her life. As a very young child, at about the age of 7 or 8, it suggested a couple of things, but if you read her biography or her autobiography, she was raped by her stepfather, for want of a better phrase. He was actually arrested, but he was only sent to prison for a day. And it did intimate in there that her uncles killed him. That is the intimation in the book. It's never actually laid out, but she came from a family where that wouldn't have been a shock. And there were so many different things that took place throughout the course of her life. And that video only gave a very small snapshot. And so it would be very useful for you to just explore, well, it would be very enriching for you to just find out a little bit more about her life and explore the various experiences that she did have. In the course of this lecture, we can only touch on a very few. The next stage really is to consider how she went from a somewhat impoverished and a background that was punctuated by all kinds of events, including segregation and hatred and everything else that we encounter, to a woman that received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. There are so many different types of things that we can explore, whether it was her life as a brothel madam, as a singer, as a performer, as a fry cook, as a single parent, so all different kinds of things. These things were just condensed into one life. And then we need to consider, well, what lessons is it that we can take from her life? There's so many different things that took place throughout the course of her life. And what I'm trying to do within the course of this lecture is she never really wrote about education, but looking at her life and her teachings, what lessons about education can we take from her experiences? Can we take from the things that she actually did say as well? And this part is going to explore a little bit, just a couple of the events from her life that perhaps can help us understand just a tiny bit the potential of education and the nature and purpose of education as well. Okay, I mentioned just a moment ago about certain events in her life, and one of them was with a lady called Mrs. Flowers, and this took place a few years after the attack on her and the rape and everything else that surrounded that. And one of the consequences of that is because she felt a guilt for it and therefore an associated guilt for the killing of her stepfather, that she became an elective mute. And she moved back to her grandma's in the southern United States. And in her book, in her first autobiography, we read this event with Mrs. Flowers, and I'm going to actually read it for you, so I apologise, I can't do it the justice that obviously she would. But she says this, she said, "One summer afternoon, sweet milk fresh in my memory, she stopped at the store to buy provisions. Another Negro woman of her health and age would have been expected to carry the paper sacks home in one hand. But Mama said, 'Sister Flowers, I'll send Bailey up to your house with these things.' She smiled that slow dragging smile. 'Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. I prefer Marguerite, though.' My name was beautiful when she said it. I've been meaning to talk to her anyway." They gave each other age group looks. There was a little path beside the rocky road, and Mrs. Flowers walked in front, swinging her arms and picking her way over the stones. She said, without turning her head to me, "I hear you're doing very good schoolwork." Marguerite, "But that it's all written. The teachers report that they have trouble getting you to talk in class." We passed the triangular farm on our left, and the path widened to allow us to walk together. I hung back in the separate, unasked and unanswerable questions. "Come and walk along with me, Marguerite." I couldn't have refused even if I wanted to. She pronounced my name so nicely, or more correctly, she spoke each word with such clarity that I was certain a foreigner who didn't understand English could have understood her. Now, no one is going to make you talk. Possibly no one can. but bear in mind language is man's way of communicating with his fellow man, and it is language alone which separates him from the lower animals. That was a totally new idea to me, and I would need time to think about it. Your grandmother says you read a lot, every chance you get. That's good, but not good enough. Words mean more than what is set down on paper. It takes the human voice to infuse them with the shades of deeper meaning. I memorized the part about the human voice infusing words. It seemed so valid and poetic. She said she was going to give me some books and that I not only must read them, I must read them aloud. She suggested that I try to make a sentence sound in as many different ways as possible. I'll accept no excuse if you return a book to me that has been badly handled. My imagination boggled at the punishment I would deserve if in fact I did abuse a book of Mrs. Flowers. Death would be too kind and brief. As I ate, she began the first of what we later called my lessons in living. She said that I must always be intolerant of ignorance, but understanding of illiteracy, that some people unable to go to school were more educated and even more intelligent than college professors. She encouraged me to listen carefully to what country people called mother wit, that in those homely sayings was couched the collective wisdom of generations. When I finished the cookies, she brushed off the table and brought a thick, small book from the bookcase. I'd read A Tale of Two Cities and found it up to my standards as a romantic novel. She opened the first page and I heard poetry for the first time in my life. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. Her voice slid in and curved down through and over the words. She was nearly singing. I wanted to look at the pages. Were they the same that I had read, or were there notes, music, lined on the pages as in a hymn book? Her sounds began cascading gently. I knew from listening to 1,000 preachers that she was nearing the end of her reading, and I hadn't really heard to understand a single word. How do you like that? It occurred to me that she expected a response. The sweet vanilla flavour was still on my tongue, and her reading was a wonder in my ears. I had to speak. I said, "Yes, ma'am." It was the least I could do, but it was the most also. "There's one more thing. Take this book of poems and memorize one for me. Next time you pay me a visit, I want you to recite. I've tried often to search behind the sophistication of years for the enchantment I so easily found in those gifts. The essence escapes, but its aura remains. To be allowed, no invited into the private lives of strangers, and to share their joys and fears was a chance to exchange the southern bitter wormwood for a cup of mead with Beowulf, or a hot cup of tea and milk with Oliver Twist. When I said aloud, it is a far, far better thing that I do than I have ever done, tears of love filled my eyes at my selflessness. On that first day I ran down the hill and into the road. Few cars ever came along it, and had the good sense to stop running before I reached the store. I was liked, and what a difference it made. I was respected not as Mrs. Henderson's grandchild or Bailey's sister, but for just being Marguerite Johnson. Childhood's logic never asks to be proved. All conclusions are absolute. I didn't question why Mrs. Flowers had singled me out for attention, nor did it occur to me that Mama might have asked her to give me a little talking to. All I cared about was that she had made tea cookies for me and read to me from her favourite book. It was enough to prove that she liked me. There are so many things within just that one experience that we could focus on to look at the purpose of education, the nature of education, and all different kinds of things. Probably one of the most famous quotes of Maya Angelou is that where she said, "I must always be intolerant of ignorance, but understanding of illiteracy." Sometimes we'll have children within our class who have learning difficulties, who have struggles with learning. That is very, very different to ignorance. And I know Sally has a view within maths of people who struggle with certain things, and she says things like, well, they just don't understand yet, that we just haven't found the way for them to access the things that we're trying to teach. And this, for me, and perhaps in Mrs. Flowers as well, kind of shows the idea that we might look at somebody and we might pigeonhole somebody, but actually everybody has the potential to learn. That we have to do our very best as we teach to reach every student. And this is obviously exemplified in this example, but it's the idea that someone who is an elective mute has been through so much trauma And Mrs. Flowers didn't talk about those traumas, though she will have known about them. What she did is she found something which was a shared interest, something that could begin a discussion. And for me, I know you've talked a little bit about constructivism and other things. For me, this translates into, well, what is it that will hook students, will enable me to cross that bridge from where they are to where the understanding, the skills and the knowledge are. So there's different kinds of things. But also within this example, we have the very final saying, I suppose, which is that it was enough to prove that she liked me. There is a connection. Every kind of teaching is about a relationship. And there's a couple of different kinds of relationship. Obviously, it's about the relationship between the teacher and the pupil and the teacher, the reciprocal relationship that is there. And we have to be very aware that we have a huge influence as we teach. But at the same time, there's also a relationship between the student and the things that they read and the things that they learn. And I think that's what we need to explore. We see this very much in her reading of The Tale of Two Cities and of poetry and all of those things. Now, obviously, later in her life, she went on to write books. She went on to write poetry, and she became an amazing poet. So all of those things. Now, there's lots of things in between as well. But at this time, it was just about the immediate. The purpose wasn't perhaps, well, to encourage her to go on to be a lifelong writer or whatever else it might be. It was about just instilling a love of learning, a relationship between teacher and pupil, Mrs. Flowers and her, but also between her and the written word. And those are the kind of things that really we need to be looking for and looking for the opportunities. Now, there may be other things within this experience that we can take from it, but it's taking those different things and thinking, well, what can we learn from those experiences? We're now going to move on and just have a look at a clip where Maya Angelou outlines her view of humanity. She begins with a religious exploration of her beliefs, but also this can also be seen as a very humanistic approach, and we can take things from it. So as you watch it, consider what impact this could have on your view of education and everything else that surrounds it.
If I think of my life as a class and what I've really learned, I've learned a few things. First, I'm aware that I'm a child of God. It's such an amazing understanding to think that the it, which made fleas and mountains and rivers and stars, made me. What I prayed for is humility, to know that there is something greater than I. Then I have to know that the brute, the bigot, and the batterer are all children of God, whether they know it or not. And I'm supposed to treat them accordingly. And it's hard, and I blow it all the time.
Mongrel class of people.
I'd like everybody to think of a statement by Terence. The statement is, I am a human being. Nothing human can be alien to me. If you can internalize the least portion of that, you will never be able to say of an act, a criminal act, or I couldn't do that. No matter how heinous the crime, if a human being did it, you have to say, I have in me all the components that are in her or in him. I intend to use my energies constructively as opposed to destructively. If you can do that about the negative, just think what you can do about the positive. If a human being dreams a great dream, dares to love somebody, if a human being dares to be Martin King or Mahatma Gandhi or Mother Teresa or Malcolm X, if a human being dares to be bigger than the condition into which she or he was born. It means so can you. And so you can try to stretch yourself. So you can internalize, homo sum, humani nihila me alienum puto. I am a human being. Nothing human can be alien to me. That's one thing I'm learning.
My goodness, there's so many things in there that we can explore. And maybe it's because it fits with my educational theory or just the things that underpin my view of humanity. The idea that everybody is of value, that we need to understand who people are. Now, we're not going to come across some of the people that she described in our classrooms. However, we're going to come across people who test our patience, who we struggle with. But it's about recognizing that within them the potential that they have. And with some it will be very, very easy. I now meet people around where I live, and it's nearly 25 years since I started teaching, and the people that they have become, and a couple of them I wouldn't have expected. Just the remarkable people and the remarkable influence that they're having in so many different places. And so it's about recognizing the inherent value of all of humanity and the potential that is there. And just the idea that no human can be alien to us is just an underpinning message of education. But at the same time, there may be other things that you took from that. But those are just a couple of the things that I noticed. We're going to look at a couple of quotes now that kind of come from Maya Angelou, but also are reflective of her life. And this one is, you may encounter many defeats, but you must not be defeated. And if we can help children understand this, perhaps as an educator, but also understand this ourselves, then this is a really good grounding for education and our career and everything else that goes along with it. Now, there are a couple of pictures there which I will talk about in a moment. But really, her whole life is punctuated with defeats, with all that came along with those. We've talked a little bit about her childhood, but there are other things as well. She talks about 2 failed marriages, and there were other relationships as well that were a part of that. She was the first black conductor of trams in San Francisco. And her early life is a litany of different jobs, and she applied to, I think it was the Navy, and she was turned down because she had once gone to a college that was since seen to be un-American, I suppose it was the phrase at that point. But it's all of these different kinds of things. She wasn't allowed to do certain things, and throughout her life she overcame the defeats, and we'll look at one of her poems later that kind of explores that in greater detail. She lived in Ghana for a while, and while she was there she came across Malcolm X, and this was the stage where he'd left the Nation of Islam, he'd completed the Hajj, and was now known as Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, and he was establishing the Organization for Afro-American Unity, and some of his view has changed, and they were going to set up this organization, and they were going to do all kinds of things to argue, to fight for civil rights. And then Malcolm X was shot by members of the Nation of Islam, perhaps supported by others. And this was it had a devastating effect on her. And then she became close to Martin Luther King, and again, they had grand ideas, and things were going to change. And then he was shot. And she went into a funk for a while. But it was about her ability to get out of that funk, to rise above the circumstances that were there, and for the influence that she had on so many different people. Now, what does this have to do with education? Well, it's evident from her life. But that is what we do, is as we strive to help students learn, we can learn, or they can learn, as much from defeats or perceived failures as they can from successes and everything else. If all we find is roses in the garden, we need to look at some of the thorns that go along with that. And so this is a really, really good quote, but also just so emblematic of her life. The next example is, you can't use up creativity. The more you use, the more that you have. Now, oh my goodness, Maya Angelou's life is just full of creativity. She's very famous for her poetry, and we'll explore some aspects of her poetry in a few minutes. One of the earliest things that she did, she was a singer, but she was also a part of Porgy and Bess, a Gershwin musical that toured Europe. This was very early on. She was a film director. She wrote screenplays. There were so many different kinds of things that she did. I guess she may be considered a polymath because of all of the different things that she turned her hand to. When she died, one of the last projects that she was working on was with a rap artist, and I think he's called Rockstar, I can't quite remember. But she was doing a hip-hop album, Caged Bird songs. So her life was punctuated with all of these different creative activities. And sometimes when we consider creativity within education, what we look at is we look at things like the arts and everything else, which are so much part of that. But it's about an approach, it's about our thinking, it's about all of the different things that we do. And sometimes what we do within schools, and Ken Robinson has suggested this, and I'm not quite convinced with that, is we teach the creativity out of people. We stop people becoming creative thinkers. I'm not convinced, because the reality of world kind of takes over as well. But it's about being able to think around an issue. It's about developing skills. It's about enabling students. And sometimes in schools what we do is there has been criticisms that we teach to the test. And to a large extent, this stifles creativity. If we give students the experiences, the skills, where they are able to kind of enjoy learning and be enthused and develop and all of those different kinds of things, that will develop them as individuals, but it will also help them in the way that they learn and everything else. And so there's different aspects. Now, I'm no poet, I'm no singer, and I certainly can't do hip-hop. But I can think in a creative way. I can strive to reach my own potential and all of those types of things that go along with what creativity is. And I think we need to broaden our understanding of what creativity is, because if we look at all of her life, and we talked about civil rights involvement and all of those things, these are just examples of the creativity that she showed in her life. I love the idea that's encapsulated in this quote: when you learn, teach. When you get, give. I also love the story that's indicated here, because it says by the age of 40, Angelou had had many careers, working as a journalist, poet, civil rights activist and singer. She was also a member of the Harlem Writers Guild, where she became friends with author James Baldwin. In 1968, Baldwin took her to a dinner party at the cartoonist Jules Pfeiffer's house. Angelou charmed guests with stories of her childhood. The next day, Pfeiffer's wife called editor Robert Loomis at Random House and said that he should get Angelou to write a memoir. When he brought it up, Angelou said, "Absolutely not." Loomis replied, "It's just as well, because to write an autobiography as literature is just about impossible." Angelou, who liked a challenge, said, "I'll start tomorrow." I love the idea that when she was faced with being told that she couldn't do something, that what she actually did is said, "Okay, well, I will do that then." And we have a responsibility, yes, that we've learned, and so we teach. However, we look at that from a pupil's perspective as well. And there are different things that we can do to enable children to teach and to have that opportunity to learn that almost social responsibility within the classroom, as well as the leadership skills and everything else that go along with it. Now, as we've looked at these quotes, these are just very, very small snapshots from her life. There's so many other things that went on. She wrote 6 or 7 autobiographies, and there's just such a rich vein of life and everything that goes on within there. But her poetry is perhaps what stands out. And so we're going to look at a couple of her poems. Now, the first one that we're going to look at is Still I Rise. Now, there's absolutely no way that I could do that any justice in the world. So what we'll have first of all is her introducing it and then also reading it. And then what we'll do is discuss that just very briefly as well.
Everyone in the world has gone to bed one night or another with fear or pain or loss or disappointment. And yet each of us has awakened, arisen, somehow made our ablution, seen other human beings, and said, "Morning, how are you? Fine, thanks, and you?" It's amazing. Wherever that abides in the human being, there is the nobleness of the human spirit, despite it all. Black and white, Asian, Spanish, Native American, pretty, plain, thin, fat, vowed or celibate, we rise. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom just 'cause I walk as if I have oil wells pumping in my living room? Just like suns and like moons, with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I rise. Did you want to see me broken? Bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries. Does my sassiness upset you? Don't take it so hard just 'cause I laugh. As if I have gold mines digging in my own backyard. You can shoot me with your words. You can cut me with your lies. You can kill me with your hatefulness. But just like life, I'll rise. Does my sexiness offend you? Oh, does it come as a surprise that I dance? As if I have diamonds at the meeting of my thighs. Out of the huts of history's shame I rise. Up from a past rooted in pain I rise. A black ocean leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak miraculously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the hope and the dream of the slave. And so, naturally, there I go rising.
My goodness, you can see from how she read that, just how emotive it is, but also how much based on her own experiences that is as well. And I think of all of those different kinds of things. And I think, what about us as educators? It doesn't matter where the children in front of us have been, where they've come from, what they've experienced in the past, still they can rise. The potential that is within them. And if that's the view that we have of education, if that's the view that we have of children, then it affects the way that we teach. And in some ways, what we're talking about today, and we've explored theorists, and we explore behaviourists, and we explore constructivists, and really, the nature and purpose of education lies beneath this, or certainly the things that I'm talking about today, lies beneath all of those things. And it's about the idea here that no matter where we've come from, we can rise, and education is the tool that can be used to rise from those different circumstances. And there's just so many things that we can take from that it's an opportunity to teach students, to allow them to recognize their value, but also to recognize their potential. There is a story told, and I don't know how true this is because I've never tried it, that if you put fleas in a jar, then they immediately jump out. But if you put fleas in a jar and put a lid on, then they will try, but obviously their ability to jump out is stopped. But then once you've done that for a while, please do not try this. Take off the lid. They will continue to jump only to the height that they've been told they can jump to, or their experiences have shown that they can. And it's about making sure that whatever experiences our students have been through, whatever experiences we've had with them in the past, that they know that you have belief in them, that they have potential to do the various things that education. Now, obviously education is multifaceted, and it should allow students to rise in different areas. I mean, I'm no artist, I'm no musician, but there are other areas that allowed me to shine. And we have to, for me, Maya Angelou's life and this poem and everything else that surrounds it kind of shows as well. We need to give students the opportunities in a broad and balanced curriculum, which is a phrase that's used often, but we have to provide that to give them the opportunity to rise. Maybe I've done you a disservice in the fact that I've chosen Maya Angelou's two most famous poems to talk about, because there are so many others that we could have chosen. This one is The Caged Bird Sings. This is not from her first autobiography, but that's kind of the title of her first autobiography. And we look at all of those different kinds of things, and we look at this poem, and I'm sorry, I will need to read this one. A free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the current ends, and dips his wings in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. The free bird thinks of another breeze, and the trade winds soft through the sighing trees, and the fat worms waiting on a dawn-bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. But a caged bird stands on the grave of dreams, his shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. So we look at this and we think, well, I guess this just ties in with so many of the other things, or this is my interpretation anyway, and please feel free to disagree with that. But it's about the idea that for some of our students, they will be the free birds. For others, they will have this narrow cage, so caught in some kind of cycle, whether that's the expectations of family, the expectations of themselves, all of those different kinds of things. And it can affect their self-esteem, it can affect all those things. So why does the caged bird sing? Well, it seems to sing with the hope of a greater future. It sings of freedom and the hope that is there. And you think of, well, her first autobiography covers probably up until about the age of 17, somewhere around there. And that's her whole story, is she is, at this stage, the caged bird. But then you read the rest of her life, and she finds the freedom. And so it's about helping our students find within themselves that freedom. Now, this may sound quite idealistic and all of those things, and maybe James is just on a soapbox and preachy or whatever else it might be. But this is the hope of education, and if we lose sight of that because of the trees that are in front of us, then we've lost something. And we have to understand the nature and the purpose and why we're educating, and why children are learning, and the potential that they have when they learn. In some ways, I feel like a fraud, because what we've done is we've spent the last half hour, 40 minutes just going through Maya Angelou's life, and it's such a snapshot. I don't think it can be anything but a snapshot, really. It really has done her life a disservice. There are so many wonderful things within her life. So just in closing, let's consider the implications for education and for our practice as well. This kind of ties together, this quote, in so many ways segregation shaped me and education liberated me. This ties together so many of the threads that we've kind of explored today, that really, that education is a way to set free the caged bird, to liberate ourselves from wherever we may feel that we've come from, and that our opportunities in life are not necessarily dictated by the circumstances in which we start. Now again, that may seem overly idealistic and all of those things, but it's for us as educators, it's for children to understand that potential is there, and there's so many things that can take place. And this kind of links with the next quote that we're just going to look at briefly. This is the idea that she said: stand up straight and realise who you are, that you tower over your circumstances. This reminds me of so many other people. One of my other heroes is a man called Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and his poem "Who Am I" just has so much impact on me as I study it. It's about turning the circumstances that we're in to our advantage. Now, yes, I'm sitting in an ivory tower and I'm discussing this and all of those different kinds of things, but it's something that we need to explore. And I'm going to share a personal experience next that kind of links with all of those things and perhaps shows why I'm so passionate about these various things. Although the picture is of me aged about 10, the description is of me at about the age of 6 or so. And if you were to get this pupil into your class, I think you may be slightly worried. Now, the first one is not unusual. I'm from a single parent family. I lived on a council estate in the north of Manchester. However, at that stage, my family was the only single parent family in the school, so it was slightly odd. I never felt it odd, but looking back, it was unusual. Neither of my parents had stayed in school beyond the age of 16, and you may look at that and you think, well, my father worked very hard and he worked in a brick foundry. My mum wasn't allowed to stay in school. She needed to go out and find a job. I have a visual impairment. I'm blind in one eye. It's never restricted anything that I've been able to do. But again, today that would place me on the special needs register. I suffered psychological issues when his father departed, causing him to be withdrawn from preschool provision. That's a bit ambiguous. My father passed away when I was 3, and it meant that I had a fear of ambulances, and it meant that I had attachment issues with my mum as well. And of course, my father had just passed away, so that's not to be undervalued. My mum worked as a barmaid in a nursing home. Now, she did those jobs to keep a roof over her head, but also so that she would be at home when we were at home. And so we had, our family, I suppose, is one of those cliches that we never quite realised that we were poor. I'm still not convinced to this day that we were, though by standards that I have today, then yes, I was. I had developmental issues. Until the age of 6, I couldn't be understood by anybody, and I had a below average reading age. Now, at the age of 6 or 7, I had the most amazing teacher. I also had the most amazing mum all the way through, who always taught me that I had huge potential, that it didn't matter whatever circumstance I found myself in. She took me to the speech therapist. She took me to different places, and I could fulfill the dreams that she didn't have. And she was 50 when she went back to university and got a degree, and it's amazing. But a teacher recognised within me there was something more. Well, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But he didn't hold my background or my perceived background. And it was about overcoming those different types of things. Now, I've had a very happy life, completely and utterly happy, and all of those things. But it's about recognising that wherever we come from, there is potential. And certainly as a parent, I hope that my children succeed in life so much better than me. Not that I've not been successful in the things that I've chosen to do, but that I hope for so much more for them. And that's kind of what underpins our education. And as we look at just a couple of other things, and it's run slightly longer than I imagined, but as we look at a couple of other things, this is really, really crucial. I'm aware you may be thinking, well, James has made this all about himself again. And it's really not the idea, but maybe that's why I'm no Maya Angelou by any stretch of the imagination in terms of the childhood I had or the success that I've found in my adult life. Neither of those, both of them pale in comparison to her. But it's about the idea that we have an influence, and we can, and maybe that's why she's influenced me so much. But if we look at this, it's become an accepted idea that teachers' ways of thinking and understanding are vital components of their practice. This is something that we need to consider. This is something that we have to recognise that our values, our view of humanity, all of those different kinds of things underpin the way that we teach, how we teach, our interrelationships with students, all of those different kinds of things. So we just have to be aware of those things. And as we consider finally a quote from a man called Parker Palmer suggests that teaching, like any truly human activity, emerges from one's inwardness, for better or worse. As I teach, I project the condition of my soul. It doesn't have to be a soul, just our inner being, or the way that we are, onto my students, my subject, and our way of being together. The entanglements I experience in the classroom are often no more or less than the convolutions of my inner life. Viewed from this angle, teaching holds a mirror to the soul, or to who we really are. If I'm willing to look in that mirror and not run from what I see, I have a chance to gain self-knowledge, and knowing myself is as crucial to good teaching as knowing my students and my subject. Now, I'm not convinced that this lecture is what you expected it to be. It might have just been me getting on my high horse and talking about an inspirational figure. And yes, that's true. I have done all of those things. But I think as we reflect on the human experience, as we reflect on our own experiences, as we reflect on the experiences of others, we can consider so much more the nature and purpose of education. What is our purpose? And then if we keep that as almost a pole star in the way that we teach, the activities we undertake, all of the different kinds of things, then it underpins everything that we do. It reflects who we are within the classroom. Now, I'm not sure that Maya Angelou is one of those theories that you explore within your assignment. And maybe it's more to do with the third part of your assignment, where you consider your motivations and the nature and purpose of education, how your subject should be taught. But it's an important thing for us to consider, and probably because you're sat here right now, you already have considered all of those things. But I just wanted to share with you my experiences with Maya Angelou, who to me is just an amazing woman who has taught me so much since I've started learning about her. Thank you.